Let's go straight to business. Thank you so much for being here, Rabbi Fisher of Young Israel of Orange County, and we're learning about the halachot of Honeypot Jewish law. When a person can be assigned to engage in what we would call very promiscuous action, and action that would be incredibly forbidden if it's to save Jewish lives. And how many Jewish lives? First of all, a quick look back at the overall outline. So, very quick look back at the outline. There are 3 sins for which a person must be ready to give his or her life. Not to turn to another religion. So when the Crusaders and the Inquisition came and tried to get Jews to become Christian, Catholic, whatnot, and give up religion, they gave their lives rather than to change religion. If someone forces you to murder, a person's supposed to give his life or her life rather than to murder another person and to engage in forbidden sexual relations. Typically, a person is required to be ready to give his or her life rather than engage in forbidden sexual relations. The rabbinic analyses go into things like, is it a male being sent or taking on engaging in sexual relations to save the Jewish people, or even one person, or it is a female? And the rabbinical inclination is that a female can be seen as karka olam, as sort of like a thoroughly passive participant who perhaps gets no pleasure from it and even is disgusted by it. Whereas for a man to perform the act, it is impossible for him to have performed the act if there wasn't at least some aspect of pleasure. So there would be a greater inclination to find a leniency to send a woman as such a spy to save lives or otherwise to take on the act of saving lives as opposed to a man. And they look at whether the effort is to save one life, to save 1 or 2 people, or to save a lot of people, or to save the entirety of the Jewish people. The more people that the act aims to save, the greater the probability that the rabbis would find leniency, particularly for a woman, like Yael or Esther. And they look at whether the lady is married or single. Much, much greater chance for leniency if the lady is single and thus not committing adultery. If she's married, you would want the woman to first get divorced for her husband to give her a get so that she's not violating the law of adultery. But if she's a secret Mossad agent or something like that, you can't really go and ask the husband to divorce her. He's going to say, what's that about? And there she is reassuring him that in another month she'll marry him again. I mean, you can't, it's a security risk. So there's all of that going on. There's also one more piece of it, that a married woman who has intimate physical relations with a man other than her husband must get divorced as soon as this becomes known, even if she did not want to do it. That is, even if she does not want to get divorced. She loves her husband, wants to rebuild the marriage. It was one time. She did it voluntarily, not for security reasons, let's say, but a woman who has intimate relations with a man other than her husband, she has to get divorced for that adultery. And the Halakha distinguishes between if she did it willingly or not willingly. So if she's married and got raped, she does not have to get divorced. But if she's married and willingly engages, then she has to get divorced. even if the husband forgives her, and even if she apologizes sincerely. So, if she's an agent for the Mossad, and she's married, and they don't make the husband give her a get because it'll endanger security, and she does what she does, do we say she did it willingly and therefore has to get divorced now? Or do we say that she did it as part of a job to save the entirety of the Jewish people and was disgusted by it, and it was comparable to being raped, so to speak, being forced into an act she didn't want to do, but had to do to save the Jewish people? And so all this comes up in the in the paper that we're studying. So we go back to it now. Again, pardon me for the coughing. It's you know the deal. And with God's help, as the class goes on, I normally do better as my kind of lungs expand during class. Here we go. We left off with Rabbi Schwartz's paper as he got to the Ma'aseh Yael ve'Esther. Let me see if I could make it even a little bit bigger. All right. Ma'aseh Yael ve'Esther v'chidush ha'maharik. As we're learning this law that I already have told you a lot about it orally, have explained these laws, but now we're actually reading an academic paper by a rabbi that goes on for about 18 pages, and it's going to be a few classes, and we're learning a really deep analysis, just as we were doing with Rambam and with Gemaras, and it's a rare opportunity that we're using our class to learn on a rabbinic level. This is rabbis talking to rabbis, and your opportunity to see how Torah is really laid out and analyzed. The Gemara Mesekhtot Nazir, Nishneta Halakha mechudeshet ad ma'od. So in the Gemara, in the tractate known as Nazir, a very unusual new law is learned. Now, the new law was new 2,000 years ago, not as new now, but Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, Gedola Avera Lishma mi mitzvah shelo lishma. And I'll actually take a quick look at that Gemara in Nazir. If we could find it quickly. I've prepared it. Let's see if I can find it. So that's the Gemara. We actually have learned it in the past in different contexts. And let's make that a little bigger also. Okay. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rabbi Nachman, son of Yitzchak, said, Gedola Avera Lishma, mi mitzvah shelo lishma. And we've learned some of this, so I'm going through some of it quicker, and the new material a little slower. It is greater to do a sin for the purpose of serving God than to do a mitzvah without intending to serve God. The latter is also good, but not as good. It seems, according to Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak. And we gave the example of Yael doing a sin, sleeping with Sisera the general, to save the Jewish people. Even though it's a sin, it was an avera, but it was a great avera, l'shem mitzvah, to save the Jewish people. And we distinguish it from some people coming over to my home and Ellen, Zichron Levracha, on a Friday night to eat Shabbat dinner with us, where they would come because they liked the food, the atmosphere, the singing, and not really to observe Shabbat per se. Or we compared to people who would go to Campus Hillel for Friday night Shabbat dinner, not because of Shabbat, but it's a free dinner. And even had non-Jews going to the Hillels for the free dinners. And they go with their Jewish friends. And Jewish kids would go. So that's a mitzvah shelo lishma. You're taking part in a Friday night, you're hearing Kiddush, you're answering a main, you're having a motzi, but you're not really doing it for the bracha, for the mitzvah. You're doing it to get a free meal and hang around with people. So that's a mitzvah shelo lishma. So that's good, but it's not super. Better to do a sin to serve God. Okay. There seems to be an alternative rabbinic teaching that says it is extremely important to do mitzvahs. If you're not motivated to do them for the mitzvah, it still is extremely important to do the deed, and thus extremely important for those of us who are committed to the mitzvah to encourage others to do it, even if not for the purpose of the mitzvah. So let's say me, as a rabbi with Rebbetzin Ellen, Zichron Levracha, important for us to encourage people to come to Friday night dinner, even if we're not selling them on Shabbat, but simply on the atmosphere, the people, the food, the singing, and not for Shabbat per se. Obviously, they're going to realize it's Shabbat. I'm reciting Kiddush, we're watching for Motzi. But what we're being told by Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav is that it's a big, big thing to get people to do mitzvahs, even if their motivation is, who knows, Shemitoch Shalol Lishman Balishman. Because if a person does a mitzvah enough times, not for the right reason, they will find the mitzvah is a lovely thing. It's nice to do them. It's a good thing. Judaism is a beautiful thing. Shabbat is a beautiful thing. And over time, many of them will come to realize, I like to go to the Fishers, not just for the food, the singing, the atmosphere. I like Shabbat. I look forward Fridays to the end of TGIF, but not thank God it's Friday that I'm now going to spend my week's earnings and get drunk, but it's Shabbat. I'm looking forward to it. And if the Fishers are out of town that week, I'm going to try to find some other rabbi who's got, or someone else who's got a Shabbat lunch going, a dinner going on. Okay. So continuing with that, Ela ema kamitzvah shelo lishma. So which is better? On the one hand, we're told better to do a sin for the right reason than a mitzvah for the wrong reason. And the other is saying, do the mitzvah for the wrong reason. That's good too, because you'll eventually end up doing it for the right reason. So the Gemara resolves what seems like a small disagreement by saying, you know what? They're both good. Because it's a verse in the Torah that says, in the Tanakh, in the story that we were learning about her, let's take that off screen so we can put that on screen. Okay. So we were learning in Judges 5, Sefer Shoftim, Parakeh, that Deborah, the prophetess Deborah, the judge and prophetess Deborah, after the killing of Sisera, marking the end of the threat of the Canaanite army of King Yavin, sings a song, the Shir Devorah. It's a full chapter, chapter 5 of the book of Judges, Shoftim, the Song of Deborah. And in her song, she's making up the lyrics on the spot, and she's saying, most blessed of women is Yael, the wife of Hever the Keni. She is more blessed than the women in the tents. Minashim ba'ohel devorach. And the Gemara asks, who are the women in the tents that the song is referring to? Man nashim sheba'ohel. Who are the women of the tents? And the Gemara answers, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. That Devorah was saying in her song that Yael is a greater, for what she did, she was greater than our four matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. Okay, so let's go back to the paper, the scholarly paper. I'm going to be really careful because I'm changing from one platform to the other, and I'm getting better at it, but I have to better not forget, like I forgot to optimize. Okay, so we continue. So the rabbi quotes the Gemara I just taught. Okay. And the rabbi continues, and I jumped away from that Gemara for time, that the Gemara continues by discussing what was Yael's sin. that she was sexually intimate with Sisera, and as we learned in past classes, as many as 7 times in one day. And we went through all of that, that it may have been as many as 7 times. And the Gemara is suggesting if that happened 7 times, perhaps we must infer that in some way Yael enjoyed it. Once, twice, she's been raped 7 times. And so the Gemara asks, it seems like she got hana, delay. It would seem 7 times that maybe she gained something that she enjoyed from his sexual acts. Rabbi Yochanan responds, no. She hated all of it. Kol tovatan shel risha'im, eina ela ra'a etzel tzadikim. Things that an evil person, a rasha, may enjoy very much is only despised by the righteous. He's not giving this example, but I will. Imagine a Roman gladiator tournament where all the Romans come to the stadium to watch gladiators fight and kill each other, or Christians subjected to lions. And the Goyim love it. And that's what they did for sport. If today we have, I don't know, baseball, football, hockey, basketball, soccer, whatnot, in those days they did those things and they loved it. And a Jew, if forced to watch such a thing, would hate it, would vomit from it, to look at such things, close eyes. And frankly, it's a very good question whether somebody someday will look back and wonder, how could a public, civilized Western democracy society throughout all of Western Europe and the United States make such a big thing out of the sport of boxing or certain kind of multi wrestling things? How could watching people get beaten up and bloodied, whether it's an act like in wrestling or it's the real thing, is that a thing Jews who sit and learn Torah and are guided by Torah values should be doing as sport, buying tickets to watch a boxing match and cheering as 2 people bang each other's heads out and bloody them? And so things that are tovasan shel rishayim, things that non-Jews and evil people find very pleasurable and enjoyable, are things that holy people recoil from. And so don't assume that Yael, even though it was 7 times, enjoyed it. Now, ein kana makam ladun b'mashma'utaha ha'hilchatit v'harayonit shel sugyat avera lishma. So the rabbi is saying, right now we're not going to get. All right, I wanted to just, but right now we're not going to get all deep into the segue of analyzing the laws of doing sins for a good purpose. We're only bringing it up in this context of our question here of sending or taking upon oneself to have sexual intercourse in a sinful way in order to save lives. So that's as far as we're going to go with that, the rabbi says. Hanogel inyanenu hu shekadei lahashpia hashpa'a mechrat al gorel hamaracha im tzva'o shel yavin melchatzur. What matters to us, the takeaway here, is that Yael, in order to make a critical impact on the army of King Yavin, in order for her to make a critical impact on that army and prevent it from being rebuilt and coming back another day, Yael Eshet Chever HaKanani Yozmo Yachasei Ishud Asurim Im Sisra. That woman initiated sexual relations with the general Sisra, asher lechora kruchim be'isur yeharig ve'al yavor, which on the surface seems indefensible and absolutely forbidden. Rov harishonim hispiru shehaheter alav hitbasasa ya'el kashur lemunach karka olam. Now the majority of rabbinic sages who have studied this subject have ruled that the underlying theory that permits Yael to have done that is that she was karka olam. What does karka olam mean? She was a piece of ground, she was a piece of earth, property, that unlike a man who engages in sexual activity and in order to complete the act undergoes some aspect of activity and pleasure, a woman truly is effectively, can be like a piece of land where she's being completely abused, taking no joy, disgusted, and just waiting for the terrible experience to end. But she knows she's saving lives, maybe the nation. But she's karka olam. Karka means real property, piece of earth, which is different from that which is the ultimate passive act versus a man who would be more of an engaged act. And we're just going to take a look at that Gemara, Sanhedrin 74b. Let me be careful here, again, as I change platforms. Sanhedrin 74b. Okay, that'll be this. So the discussion in Sanhedrin 74a and b is the issue of Pikuach Nefesh and the idea of being willing to give up your life for certain actions that otherwise are absolutely forbidden. And the rabbis discuss it, and they go further. The rabbis distinguish, for example, between a public and a private act. If someone threatens you to violate a Jewish law in private, and by violating that law in private, you can save your life, there may be greater permission, leniency, than if they force you to do it in public. Look, you're even in private not allowed to kill someone else to save your own life. If they tell you, we will kill you unless you kill this one, that might typically happen where they want you to kill a politician or a military officer. You're not allowed to do it. Doesn't matter whether they tell you in private or public. All right. And if they tell you to be, let's say, to go to a church in private, there might be room. Maybe not. Depends on the rabbi that makes the ruling. And frequently in these cases, you don't have a chance to turn to a rabbi and get a ruling. When things are in that state of affairs, there's no chance to get a ruling. But if you could, some rabbis would say, all right, go into the church, bow down, do whatever they tell you. It's only you and them, and no one's going to know, no one will see. They will not tell anyone else, it's private. And such rabbis would say, you definitely cannot do it in public. If they're forcing people publicly, like in the Crusades and Inquisition, to change religion, then you can't do it. But if they're just doing a private thing, so that they have the joy for their purposes, but no one's going to know, and you can back off the minute they let go of you. If they force you to eat pork, I don't know, in private, that's maybe okay. That is okay. But if they force you to eat pork in public as part of shmad, S-H-M-A-D, really shin mem daled, where they're forcing religion on you and they're forcing you to violate Jewish religion, Judaic religion, then even if it's not one of the 3 inviolable laws, perhaps you're not allowed to do it. Even though we've learned you're allowed to drive on Shabbat to the hospital if the wife is pregnant and going in labor, or you're allowed to eat non-kosher on Shabbat if that's the only food available. You're allowed to eat non-kosher if you're in the Russian army, the Tsar's army, and that's all they're serving. But it may be that it's different if it's public and private. And so, Ki ata Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan, so the Gemara says that when a rabbi named Ravin came to Babylonia, he was based in Israel. There were two great Jewish centers, the way nowadays there is Israel and America. At that time, there was Israel and Babylonia. We had been exiled by the Romans, and earlier by the Babylonians, and subsequently by the Romans. We came back, and then the Romans exiled us. But even after the Roman exile, there remained a strong Jewish presence in Israel. It's a great mistake to think that when people talk about the 2,000-year exile, that the land was left completely empty. It's that the majority of Jews were exiled, and the Jewish commonwealth was taken down, and we were forced all around the world. So there was that 2,000-year exile. On the other hand, there always were Jews in Israel, and there always were Jewish academies, like in Yavne. So when Ravin came from Israel, there was a certain amount of traveling back and forth between Israel and Babylonia, a lot of cultural exchanges. So one time when he came, Kiyasa Ravin Omer Rabbi Yochanan, so he said that he had learned from Rabbi Yochanan. Remember, when a rabbi teaches Torah, if he's already learned it from someone else, you have to quote your source. Partly it's an academic responsibility. We know that the president of a former president of Harvard was forced to quit partly because she did not cite her sources, and instead just took data and presented that as her own. And so she got the boot. So it's a general academic principle to cite your sources. And on a second level, it's a halakha. You need to cite your sources. It's learned actually from the Gemara that Esther had told Achashverosh when she disclosed to him that Bigtan and Teresh were planning to assassinate him, she disclosed that it was Mordechai the Jew who tipped her off. And therefore it was written into his chronicles that his life was saved by a tip from Mordechai the Jew. And then later on in chapter 4, he can't sleep, and they read his chronicles, and they remind him by reading the chronicles that his life had been saved by the Jew. And that set in motion a number of things that led him to take down Haman and preserve and save the Jews. So they learn from that. You always have to give source. You always have to cite whoever you learn from. Okay, so Rabbi says I learned from Rabbi Yochanan, Afilu shelo b'shat hashmad, even in a situation where it's not people threatening to kill you and people threatening to force you into a different religion. Lo amru ela b'tzina. It was never taught that you're allowed to violate things as long as they're in private. Avol b'farhesya afil mitzakala yehari vel yavor. If someone, even if not shmad, even if not trying to turn you into a Christian or a Muslim or whatever, but they're trying to get you to eat pork, or violate some other Jewish law, to light a candle on Shabbat. If they're trying to do it in public, like that's the famous story that set off Hanukkah, that the Greeks tried to get that guy to eat pork, and then Matityahu slew him. So, because it was in public. So if somebody is forced to violate any Jewish law in public, and they're being forced, Yeharig Ve'al Yavor, they should give up their lives rather than do it. And so again, you're going to have different rabbinic opinions and different readings. But what we're seeing is that it's more severe to violate Jewish law in public, if under coercion. And then the Gemara talks, and we're not going to, and they ask, what is public? And the answer public is in the presence of at least a minyan, at least 10 men over the age of 13. And then it continues, So the Gemara goes on and says, well, we're always talking about how Esther did right, but actually everything she did with Achashverosh was public. After she was chosen in the beauty contest and made the queen, public doesn't mean that the whole nation walks into the bedroom and watches. As we only learned Tuesday night with Avshalom, the son of David, the mere act of putting those concubines into the tent and then going into the tent himself, that's considered the public rape of those concubines. Or when a chatan and kala go into a yichud room, close the door, and two witnesses stand outside, that's public, that they're intimate, and the wedding has now been completed, and all requirements are done. And so Esther was public. Namely, people knew she was in the palace. Amar Abaye, Esther karka olam haytan. Abaye says the thing about Esther, although it was public, she was karka olam. She was merely like natural ground. So passive, she didn't do anything. What could she do? She just did what the king expected her to do, and she did it. And the king got what he wanted, and she kept her mouth shut. And she didn't say, "Oh, I don't want to," but she didn't do anything. Okay, so we continue. With that principle out of the Gemara, back to this platform. She'oto chitshu chazal b'sugya b'Mesekhtot Sanhedrin. So Rov HaRishon and most sages have stated that the leniency for which both Yael and Esther are deemed righteous by the rabbis of the Talmud and ever since is because they were karka olam. They are deemed to not really have done anything. Esther all the more so. Esther was taken against her will, beauty contest, yada, yada, yada. Yael's a little bit more quirky because she did stand at the front door of the tent, or the opening of the tent, and she beckoned him in. So she was an active player, but when he actually did his thing to her, she did nothing. That's the understanding. She played the role of karka olam, just property. Mashma'ut advarim shetafkid ha'ish shab b'kiyum yachasei ishut hu mishani b'yachatz la'ish. In other words, the rabbis deemed the role of the man and the role of the woman as religiously different in the matter of intercourse. And therefore, when it comes to an Esther or a Yael, they don't say she should have given her life. Imkach, Pnei HaDevarim, Haresh Legabe Yael lo nitchadesh davar, ubevadai ein lomod mikan shemutar lavor avirot chamurot b'miskeret milchama ol hatzalat nefashot. So the analysis now leads us to understand that if the woman does nothing, there is halachic grounds to say she has not sinned in a severe way in the context of milchama or hatzalat nefashot, if and done in the context of war or saving lives. Again, you can't get away with that committing adultery, where a woman just decides she has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to be intimate with whoever's the latest heartthrob, and he picks her up, some basketball player picks her up at a crowd, or some movie celebrity picks her up at a grand opening, and she can't go and say, well, I once attended a Torah class, and I understand that I'm a woman, so I can go with him. The only thing is that when we get behind a closed door, I just lie down and have to let him do everything. No, that's forbidden. don't even think of that. That obviously you won't. That's adultery. Or forbidden relations if she's not married. And we're only talking about milchama o hatzalat nefashot. Only in a case of war or saving lives. So what we've gone into is the idea of public versus private. If it's private, better. But Yael and Esther were public. And then it becomes, well, she's karka olam, she's passive, like a piece of property. Amnam, yesh min rishonim sheitziu ikaron acher, legabe ma'aseh Yael. So the Rabbi Schwartz says, actually, there are other rabbinic authorities who find in Yael's actions some other basis to find justification and validation. Remember, the Gemara says she's greater than Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. So that's kind of an axiom here. We're starting off like in geometry with sort of an axiom. And this is that we've already been told Yael is more righteous, more blessed than Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah in the Song of Deborah. So the question and analysis is not, did she do the right thing? The Gemara says she did the right thing. So the analysis becomes, the discussion becomes, how can you say it was the right thing? But it was the right thing. So it's being suggested, and it was public. So one suggestion is, well, she was like a piece of ground. Yael, Esther, and they didn't do anything. And then there's another opinion of Tosfot in the tractate Ketubot, the Asta Avera Lishma Kedei Latzil Yisrael. There's the Tosfot, the greatest commentator in all the Torah and Talmud was Rashi. And Tosafot were his grandsons. That's some nachas, huh? Imagine you're Rashi, and your kids come out pretty good, and your grandkids, I mean, is the greatness going to be handed down? And his grandkids are the Balei Tosafot, who are among the greatest commentators on the Talmud in all of the 2,000 years of Talmud study. In fact, in yeshiva, you practically never learn Rashi. You never learn Gemara without Rashi, and you never learn Rashi without Tosafot. And that's the way you learn. So Tosafot, talking in Mesekhtot Ketubot, Tractate Ketubot, Folio 3b, Daf Gimel Amud Bet, they say, in the words in this discussion, that what validates Yael, she did it in public, and not that she was karka olam, a passive piece of property, but rather kedei lahatzil et Yisrael. She did it to save the Jewish people. As if to say, if she had done exactly the same thing, but not to save the Jewish people, she would not be compared to Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And there would be some real problems here, and she might not have been mentioned in the song. Gam ha-Meiri, the Sanhedrin sa'ad b'derech hazu. And the Meiri, another great rabbinic authority out of France in the Middle Ages, takes a similar position. V'im teshiveni Yael shenishma'a l'sisra af bertzona, k'mo she'amru sheva be'ilot ba'alot torasha. And if you'll tell me that Yael actually willingly had intercourse with Sisera 7 times, nevertheless, hatzalat rabim shani, that's Aramaic, to save the public, for that purpose, it's a different thing. V'chol shekein Yael, and even more so with Yael. Shehaya lahana'at atzmo u'b'tzina, because the Meiri says the pleasure was his, not hers, and it was private, inside her tent. It was not public. People did not see her. sticking her head out the door or the opening of the tent. So we might have thought it was public, the way she went out of the tent and drew him in. But he was running for his life. The rest of his army had been killed. The Jewish army had not caught up with him. So at that moment, he was running to save his life, and there was no one else within view. When she walked out the tent to beckon him in, it was Bitsina, it was private, even though the initial invite was outdoors. So it was private, not public. And it was to save the public. V'dona et atzma ka'anusa, latzalat rabim. And she deemed herself as being raped for the purpose of saving many. Rabin is many versus, so the Meiri says it's permitted because she was saving many. And then there's another rabbinic opinion that it's not enough to be doing it to save many. It has to be saving the entirety of the Jewish people. Here, in taking down Sisera, she terminates the army, preventing the army of the Canaanites from rebuilding again and coming back. She saves the entire Jewish people, much as Esther. Ledat ha'meiri, ha'heter liya'el mevusas, al kach shehaya medubar b'atzalat rabim. So the Meiri, Rabbi Schwartz explains, is ruling that what made Yael's act permitted is that she was saving many. Im kilo nimnami l'tzayen ta'amim nosafim lakel. And the Meiri, that rabbi, he's known as the Meiri, that French rabbi from the Middle Ages, feels so strongly that a woman is allowed to subject herself to be, let's say, raped, or otherwise to have intercourse in a context like this to save many, hatzalat rabim, that the Meiri, he felt so strongly that that alone is adequate as a lenience and justification. He doesn't even bother in his analysis to try to find additional bases for leniency in judging Yael. His attitude is that's enough. Im kilo nimnam l'tzion l'tzayen tamim nosafim lakel. Now, Rabbi Yosef Cologne, there was a rabbi who practiced in France and Italy. It was Rabbi Yosef Cologne, I guess C-O-L, like C-O-L-O-G-N-E. And he's known as the Maharik. Rav Yosef Cologne, Morenu, Rav Yosef Cologne. It's very common, like Rambam, like Rashi. Many rabbis are known by the initials of their name throughout rabbinic literature. So Rashi's not typically referred to as Rav Shlomo Yitzchaki, and Rambam is not typically known as Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, known as Rashi and Rambam. And Rabbi Yosef Cologne, he's known as the Maharik. He was significant and consequential enough. Shechai b'Tzorfat u'Italia, b'sof tekufat harishonim. He lived in France, Tzorfat, and in Italy. And then u'mitzatet et Tosfot, he does not even quote or cite the Tosfot that we just learned, v'hameiri, or the Meiri, ach marchiv yoter b'beir halakha. Rather, he goes another stand, he pushes it a little more. Lidvarav, according to him, she'otam hu mevases al tzitut mitosfot Rabbeinu Yehuda miParisham. He cites a Rabbi Judah of Paris. Ochein chalu Yael ve'Esther heterim marchikei lechet. No question that Yael and Esther both are praised in Judaism based on extremely outlier leniencies. And the reason is because, Maharik says, Mishum shehein pa'alu lo rak l'tzorech Pikuach Nefesh. The reason we are so extraordinarily outlierly lenient in justifying Esther and Yael is not merely that they subjected themselves to Sisera or King Achashverosh to save lives, Va'aflo rak lahatzalat rabim, and not even because they subjected themselves to that to save many lives, ela lahatzalat am Yisrael kulo. Rather, the Maharik says the only justification is that by doing what they did, Yael and Esther, they were saving am Yisrael kulo, the entirety of the Jewish people. V'hinei davar pashudu. This is a quote, it's indented, that he writes that ki Esther lo asta shum yisur. The reason we say that Esther violated no prohibition whatsoever. V'lo haya b'davar afilu nidnud avera. And there wasn't even a drop, a spot of sin. Ela mitzvah rabbah, rather a great, great mitzvah what she did. Asta shehitzila kol Yisrael, because she saved the entirety of the Jewish people. V'teida dechenhu shaharei bavoa lifnei hamelech, and the Maharik adds, go back to the Megillah and look at the text. That's what it was. Shorta aleha roch kodesh. She had a divine spirit came upon her, and shita sta mitzvah rabba ma'od. It's clear she did an extraordinary mitzvah. Ubifrat the karka olam hayata. First of all, she was karka. She was property. She was a piece of ground. She had did no act, and it was detestable to her. V'chein matzinu b'Yael eshet chever akini sheshipcha kata b'maseh d'Sisra. And the same thing as we've been learning, how the Talmud and otherwise, and the Song of Deborah praise her to the heavens. In both cases, they ended up doing it. Mutar, davar zeh, mutar lasod averazu lishma afilu hi esherish. In these two cases, particularly Yael is interesting on the one hand because Yael was already married. It says in the text of chapter 4 of the book of Judges that she's the wife of Hever the Canaanite. So she's married, which at the outset of class, we talked about the adultery concern. Do you make the man have to give her a get? Here it was just, she couldn't possibly. Husband leaves for work in the middle of the day or whatever. She's there as a married woman alone in the tent, and suddenly Sisera passes by. There's no time for her to, she's got to act now or never, and she does. And she's a married woman, Kadela Hatzil, Kol Yisrael. And she did it not just to save herself, fearing the guy's going to come into my tent, or to save a few people in the neighborhood, but to save the entirety of the Jewish people. And likewise with Esther. There's an interesting Midrash. The Midrash says, and it's a debate, not everybody agrees. We don't have time now to get into the whole thing about what is a Midrash, when do we believe a Midrash, when don't we believe the Midrash. But there's a Midrash that says Esther had been married to Mordechai. He wasn't merely her uncle, or that he was her husband. And according to the Midrash, that she was his wife, then when she was intimate with Achashverosh the king, she also was a married woman committing adultery, but acting as karka, olam, as ground. V'chein matzinu be'Esther shehemtzia atzma li'Achashverosh, and we found the same thing with Esther. When she submitted herself to Achashverosh, b'sha'ah shelo haya tova'ah. And remember, Yael, it's not that Sisera came charging into her tent and raped her. It's rather she was outside the tent and beckoned him in and lured him to engage in sex. And Esther was not completely raped either, because whatever went on when she first got pulled into the beauty contest, brought to the king's palace, and forcibly was married, perhaps raped. But in the famous event that happens later, where she approaches the king and she gets the king to come to her parties, and at the parties she tells the king about Haman and she saves the Jewish people. In those things she initiated. She had said to Mordechai, he hasn't called to see me in 30 days, and anybody that goes to see him, if he doesn't want to see them, he has them killed. And Mordechai said, You have to risk your life now because who knows whether God put you in exactly this place at this time to save the Jewish people. And if you do not act now, maybe a different Savior will be sent by God to save the Jewish people, and you and your family will die. So she did what she did. And she went at a time that the king was not particularly asking to see her. So even there she started up. And she lured him to desire him. So how do you get around that? Because in the words of Maharik, Kovea Meforashot Shel Hashem Hatzalat Kol Yisrael Hutar La'avor Al Isurim Chamurim. In order to save the entirety of the Jewish people, it would be allowed for her to engage both of them in the most severe sins imaginable. Mitzad, I'm going to take about 5 more minutes. Mitzad Sheni, Hamarik Madgish Medubar Ba'avira Lishma. Now the Maharik adds, she wasn't doing it to have a good time, to have like, wow, I'm going to be intimate with this famous general or with the king of my country. And she's doing it to serve God. Avera Lishma. She knows she's doing what is a sin, but it's to save the Jewish people and thereby to serve God. Kefisha Kavar Lamadnu Baharchava B'Shurim Kodmim, Rabbi Schwartz says that he has been teaching his class this very subject for a long time, that when it comes to Chilul Shabbat or Achila B'Yom HaKippurim, L'tzorach Pikuach Nefesh Einam Nechbasim Ka'avira, that when it comes to breaking Shabbat to save a life, like driving the wife to the hospital when she's pregnant, or eating on Yom Kippur, where a person's life would be in danger otherwise, those things are not sins. The Adarah, but just the opposite. Hamachalel Shabbat L'tzorach Pikuach Nefesh Yesh Lo Sachar Tov Me'et Hashem. Someone who transgresses Shabbat law to save a life actually gets a very great reward from God. Ach, b'mikra shalafanenu, but in the subject before us, shal yachasei ishut asurim lahatzalat ha'am, in this rare situation where someone engages in sexual intercourse that's absolutely forbidden, but for the purpose of saving the entirety of the Jewish people, hamaharik savur sha'achina ve'ra yishkan, the Maharik believes that yes, the act itself is a quote unquote sin, elashehi lishma, but it's a sin for a greater goal. Lahalan b'dvarav sham madgish Maharik she'Esther ne'esra Mordechai bala al pi Midrash Chazal. And actually, it's interesting, he says, Rabbi Schwartz, that Maharik, in his analysis, according to those who accept the Midrash, which teaches that Mordechai was her husband, that she actually was married to her uncle Mordechai when Achashverosh took her to be the queen and the wife of Achashverosh, which, as we learned at the outset of class, if a married woman engages in intercourse with another man, not her husband, while she's married, and it's not a rape, she never may go back to him, to the original husband, even if the husband forgives her and she begs forgiveness. And they agree they want to do it. If she's married and engages in adultery, but it's not rape or something that she detests, rape, she would have to be banned forever. The Maharik says that Esther, actually, if you believe the Midrash, that Esther was married to Mordechai, then Esther would have been forbidden for the rest of time to go back to be with Mordechai after the story kind of worked itself out, because she willingly engaged in the next round of intercourse. It was unlike the beauty contest where she was forced against her will. So, Lahalan b'dvarav sham madgish Maharik, the Maharik emphasizes she'Esther ne'esra al Mordechai bala, that Esther thereupon became forbidden for all time to come on her husband Mordechai, al pi Midrash Chazal, for those who accept the interpretation of the Midrash, kedin eshet ish shenivala b'ratzon, according to the same law that applies to any married woman who has sexual intimacy willingly, because she willingly brought in Achashverosh halfway through the Megillah, unlike at the beginning. V'lo ba'onos, and that was not a rape. Dahainu she'achein hoyata ve'ra b'davar. So even though there was a sin, ve'ulama v'razu hutra avor hatzalat Klal Yisrael. So even though it was a sin, but it was a permitted sin to save the entirety of the Jewish people, still, because it was willing, she would not be able to go back to her husband afterwards. And she'd have to be with Achashverosh for the rest of her life. And now just wrap it. No, yeah, let's see what he's doing. Okay, okay. Let's just read this real fast and just finish the page. Haboskim rachmanim nechaku hamnitan l'smoch divrei marik halakha l'maseh kasher isha moser atzma lidavar averol atzalat achirim. Yeah, shalom. So it just says, in wrapping up, that all the rabbinic authorities have debated forevermore where they come out on this whole thing. Yesh shalom dusha davar mutar. There are those rabbis who say it would be permitted for a woman even to save only one person. Others say it's only allowed if you're saving a lot of people, and others say, we'll leave it there. Others say it's allowed only if you're saving the entirety of the Jewish people. So you've already been taught the foundational principles in the outline I created, and now you see how they're all coming together. And you're seeing that to this day, rabbinic authorities somewhat distinguish. And you're going to see, as we get towards the end of the analysis, he's going to bring in very contemporary Israeli rabbinic authorities talking particularly with application to the Mossad, that they're going to go from the analysis of the medieval and classic authorities discussing the Tanakh to actual questions of the modern day Mossad, and the Vanunu case is going to be mentioned, and things like that, and how that all plays out. Thank you very much for being here. God willing, we'll see you on Sunday. God willing, number one, have a wonderful Shabbat. God willing, number two, we'll see you on Sunday. And next Tuesday and Thursday, we won't be meeting, and God willing, then the following Sunday. I'm sorry if I was coughing a little bit more at the outset. And, it's hard to predict. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbat. Bye-bye.